Happy coding.
Hey there, and welcome to the next video in our series of Intro to Web Dev. Um, right now, we are sort of in the middle of learning about libraries, and in the last video, we learned about loading a library in your HTML file and then using the functions that the library offers in your JavaScript. And in this video, I am excited because now I get to talk about my favorite JavaScript library, and that is a library called p5.js. So yeah, I'm going to walk through it and sort of introduce the library itself, and then sort of show you how to use it and all that good stuff. So let's see. So first off, I want to maybe just introduce a concept. It's not a huge deal, but it's the fact that like creative coding is a thing. So if I just type creative coding into my search engine, I see a bunch of results, and you can click through them to learn more. But essentially, this is the idea that you can use code to be creative. And hopefully by now that's not a surprise to you, because a lot of what we've been learning about is all about creativity and finding ways to express yourself and do stuff that's interesting to you. But this is a pretty broad category that ranges from everything from like digital art to things like special effects in movies to like if you've ever been to a concert and there's like a trippy like background, that's all written using code. And so there's this idea that you can write code that helps you be creative. And there's a bunch of ways to do it. And in fact, this Wikipedia article has a few libraries that are in a bunch of different languages. And the one that we are going to focus on is p5.js. The other way that you might find p5.js is, I don't know, if you were just typed like creative coding JavaScript library into a search engine, and you'll get a bunch of results. And I've never played with pts.js, but it's an option. And here's p5.js, which is the one that I am going to sort of show you today. So let's go to their homepage, and just like any other JavaScript library, the first kinds of things I'm looking at, well, first off, I'm looking at their homepage and stuff, which they actually updated since the last time I saw it. So this might get interesting because I'm not sure if I'm going to know exactly where to go. But the idea is that you're reading through, you're learning more about the library just on their homepage. And then what you're looking for is some documentation around how to use that library and a URL to load the library in the first place. So let's see. I see download p5.js. I see donate. So sure, let's go to download. And I'm either looking for a file that I can download, and looks like I can do that if I want to, or I'm looking for a URL like this. So this is a URL that I can use and load that directly into my index.html file. So let's do that. So I have a glitch project here. It's just sort of a bare bones. I haven't touched anything yet. Project in glitch, and let's load the JavaScript library. So I'm going to use a script tag, and I'm going to say source equals, and then I'm going to paste in what I just took from the p5.js web page. And then I'm going to close it out and close out my tag. Okay, so now I have loaded the p5.js library in my index.html file, and I can now start to use it. I haven't actually done that yet, but I can do that. And so what I would do if I wasn't watching this video is to learn more about p5.js. First off, there's a bunch of like tutorials that you can work through. There's a reference that gives you a big old list of here's all of the functions that p5 gives you. The other place you can go is happycoding.io, my little webpage, and there are a bunch of p5.js tutorials on there. So you can click through here, and some of this will be kind of review for you since you have already been coding in JavaScript, but this is a good way to sort of introduce yourself to like the things you can do in the library. So you can do sort of like visual things, and here's a bunch of like example projects that I've put together exploring different concepts in p5.js. But I think because I am, the one recording the video, I guess I will just sort of show you how I would start a p5.js project. So the first thing I'll do is I'll go back to my my glitch project here. And again, so far, the only thing I've really done is load the JavaScript library, load the p5 library. So the next thing I'll do is I'll create a script.js file of my own. This is where my code will go. You can call this whatever you want. Often folks who are coding in p5 call this sketch.js because you're usually like creating some kind of sketch, but it's really up to you. That's just one convention. You can call it unicorn.js if you really wanted to. But I tend to call mine script.js because that's a pretty common name. So I'm going to say script source equals script.js here. And so now I am loading both the p5 library and the and my own JavaScript. I haven't actually done anything yet, but I'm just loading the file. So again, you could go read the p5 tutorials, but I'm just going to kind of dive into the code here. So the first thing that p5 is going to want is a setup function and usually a draw function. And the way that looks is you just define a function called setup, and then in here goes some code. This is usually setup code. And I'll just kind of get started. So I'll call a function called create canvas, and this is a function that the p5 library gives me, and I'll give it a size of, I don't know, 400, 400. And maybe just to get something working, I'll give it a background of like red, just to see it. And there it is. There is my red canvas. It's right there. I guess I'm going to get annoying because my face is going to be in the way, but there is my canvas, which I've drawn a red background. It is pretty annoying that Glitch doesn't recognize these as functions because they are in the library, but you can, I guess, just ignore those errors for now because they're not really errors. As long as it works over here, you're good. So how did I know to call create canvas and background? So first off, like I have used p5 quite a bit. Just because I think it's a really fun library. But the way I learned was by going through these tutorials and going through this reference. So this reference contains pretty much every function that p5 gives you. And so let's see if I can find the create canvas function. Let's do like a control F for create canvas. There it is under rendering. So if I click that, I will get more information and you can read through and learn more. But essentially what you do is you call create canvas, which creates a canvas, a square usually, or a rectangle that you can then draw to. And currently I am just drawing a background to it. So similarly, you can read more about the background function if you want. So here's background, and you can read all about the different parameters it can take and how to set different colors. This is going to be pretty similar to some of the CSS stuff we've done, but it's a start. And then from here, I can start to draw maybe like shapes. So maybe I'll draw a circle. So I can find a circle function, draws a circle, sure. And I can read through this. Here's some example code where it's creating a canvas, drawing a background, and then drawing a circle. You can usually ignore this describe. This is for things like screen readers, and if you want to investigate that, that's totally cool. But a common sort of misconception is that the describe function tells p5 what to draw, and it doesn't. This is a way for you to describe your sketch to people who can't see it. So anyway, we're going to focus on this circle function, and you can learn more about like what exactly those numbers are. So x, y, and d. And that's the location, and then D is its width and height. Okay, so if I go back to my code here, I can draw a circle, and I'm just going to put some kind of random numbers in there. So I'm going to say like, I don't know, 200, 150 maybe. And there is my circle. And without even really reading in a ton of depth about like exactly what parameters do what, you can just play around. That's one of the things I really like about p5, and like coupled with this glitch editor, I think is a really good combination. Because I don't know what happens if I change this 100 to a 150. Let's see. And it moves down a little bit. If I change it to a 200, moves down even further. If I change it to like a 250, moves down even further. And same thing over here. If I change this to a 100, what happens? Moves to the left. If I change it to, I don't know, like a 300, moves to the right. And then finally, if I change this to, I don't know, 100, gets a little bigger. If I change it to, I don't know, like 10, it gets teeny tiny. It's still in there, but it's pretty small. So you can kind of learn what these parameters are for. And this is the X value. So left to right, you're saying put this 200 pixels over. The second one is your Y position, which is like from top to bottom. So top is actually 0, which is a little weird, but if you think of the top as where like the web page starts, then it makes a little bit more sense. And then finally the size is just how wide it is. So if I change that back to 100, it gets a little bigger. Okay, so then from there, it's a matter of like figuring out what other shapes you can draw, what other things you can do. And for that, your best friend is the P5 reference. And so you can draw all kinds of stuff. You can draw sort of these primitive shapes like triangles and rectangles. You can also get really involved and do things like, 3D sort of modeling. You can draw different kinds of colors. You can use typography to like have different fonts and like text sizes. You can show images, all this good stuff, and you can get really involved in like really advanced like visualizations, and it's really fun. But the next thing I want to sort of show you is another concept. So I could add a bunch of triangles and stuff, but instead of that, I'll introduce you to something called the draw function. So the thing to sort of notice here is that I defined the setup function, but I never actually called it anywhere, right? So like in my index.html, you might expect like body on load equals setup, or maybe a button on click equals setup, but I don't have that, and I don't need it because P5 is actually calling it for me. So P5 has internal logic that I don't really need to worry about that automatically calls various functions. And setup is one of them. So if I go to the reference, I'm sure setup is in here. Yeah, setup. So you can read more about that, but this is automatically called by P5 one time at the very beginning. There are many other functions that P5 calls automatically at different times, and one of the most common ones is the draw function. So if I have function draw, and let me maybe move some of my code. Maybe I'll move my circle into draw. And you'll see that my circle is still there. So P5 is calling the draw function. And where it gets interesting is, okay, so what I should say is, and if this is already enough for you, and you're like, okay, I can draw different shapes and that feels like enough. And if you're excited about like, okay, let me just draw a bunch of shapes and like, let's just get something working on the screen, that's totally cool. And you can sort of stay there, and here's some examples. Like if you want to draw an animal, here's an example that draws an animal. If you want to draw a jack-o'-lantern, here's an example that draws a jack-o'-lantern. So if I go here to that code, here it is. I'm calling a bunch of P5 functions, passing in arguments and parameters to draw, in this case, a cute little pig. But you can draw, whatever you want. So if that feels like enough, that's cool. You can stay there. However, where P5 I think gets extra interesting is the fact that this draw function is called 60 times per second. So you actually have like a 60 frames per second render loop, it would be called, which is how you can end up creating animations. So I don't know, let's see, what's a good way to do this? So instead of drawing it at like a hard-coded 200, which is right in the middle of my canvas, I want to draw this where the mouse is, for example. So if I didn't know how to do that, I could go to the reference and find like an input section maybe. They changed this around a little bit, so I'm kind of getting used to it. Okay, here it goes. So mouse. So I have mouse X here. That's a variable that the P5 library gives me, and mouse Y. So if I go back to my project here, and what I'm going to do is draw my circle at mouse X and mouse Y. And right now, the circle is drawn sort of in the upper left corner because I haven't really moved my mouse onto the canvas yet. So it's just 0, 0, which is the upper left corner. But if I move my mouse into my canvas, the circle will sort of follow me around. And ooh. And even with, just like 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 lines of code, I have this like super like interesting looking little art project here. And so that's kind of the power of P5 is you can start to have these like really interactive, really visual projects. And it's just from functions and variables that are in the library. So one thing I want to call out is right now, let me refresh this. The background starts out as red, and then I move my mouse around and it sort of, fills up the screen, and they stick around. The old circles stick around. And that is because if you think about how this code is being called or when this code is being called, setup is called one time at the very beginning when you first load the page. And so it creates a canvas, which adds this sort of rectangular area to the page. And then it draws a red background, and then it's done. And then immediately after that, the draw function is called 60 times per second, and 60 times per second, this code draws a circle wherever the mouse is. So it's just on top of whatever was there before. So if I wanted to change this, so let's say I wanted to only show like one circle, not have them sort of add up in the background like that, I can move my call to background. So instead of calling it only one time at the very beginning, I am going to call it every frame. So now, at the very beginning in setup, I create my canvas, and that's all I do. I just create my canvas and I'm done. And then 60 times per second, what I do is I paint a red background, which paints the whole canvas red, and then I draw a circle where the mouse is. So let's look at what that does. And now I only have a single circle, which follows the mouse around because I am using the mouse X and mouse Y variables. But the background clears out the old circles essentially every frame. So this is, it kind of depends on exactly the sort of effect you're going for, whether you want your old frames to like stack up and kind of paint over top of each other, or if you want to clear out the frame every time and draw a new scene. So that is setup and draw. There are other functions. So let's see, how do I want to explain this? There's functions like, let's say instead of always showing a circle wherever the mouse is, let's say I wanted to show it only when I clicked. So I could read more about this in the reference, but here we go. Mouse pressed or mouse clicked. Mouse clicked is here. Or mouse pressed, it's kind of up to you whether you want it to be like when you first press or after you click the whole thing. You can play around with both, but let's see an example of what that looks like. So if I instead have like function mouse pressed, and then in here, what am I going to do? I'm going to draw a circle where the mouse is. So I'm going to take this, put it there, and then the other thing I'm going to do is move this background back to setup so that my old frames are not cleared out. So now I don't show any circles yet. I'm moving my mouse around, but I don't see a circle. But if I click, then I do draw a circle. So I can click around and I can sort of draw with my mouse using like a really small amount of code because we're relying on the P5 library. So you can explore other functions. There's other functions, and it's interesting, like if you're on a phone, you have other sort of functions available to you. So you can get like the tilt of the screen, the accelerometer, stuff like that. But mouse press will get you pretty far as well if you're just kind of clicking around. So that's the idea of using different functions in P5. These are different callback functions. And the next thing I will talk about, maybe the last thing, we'll see, is... Okay, I have two more things. One is, first I'm just going to get this sort of back to normal without any mouse pressed. So I'm just drawing a circle. One of the things I really like about P5 is that it's a really fun like environment to play around with the concepts that we've been learning this entire time. So if you're like, hey, I remember that we talked about like variables and sort of changing variables over time, and I want to play with that idea. You can. So instead of having like mouse X, mouse Y, maybe I'll create a variable. So I'll say up here, I'll say like let, I don't know, circle y equals 0 at first. And then I'm going to draw a circle at circle y. And maybe I'll just hard code. Actually, that needs to be like, that's the x, and I'll call this circle y. So right now, I am just drawing my circle at a hard-coded value of 200. So it's like halfway across the screen. And then a value of circle y. Circle y is just 0 for now, because that's all I've set it to. But here's where the magic comes in. If I change the value of circle y over time, I can now create animations. So let's do that. So I'll just say like circle y plus plus. So I'll add 1 to circle y every frame, and we see the ball dropping. And that's because if you think about how this code is being called, draw is being called 60 times a second. So 60 times a second, I draw a background, which clears out every previous frame. And then I draw a circle at circle y. And then I increase circle y by 1. So then 1/60th of a second later, circle y is now 1. And I draw a circle at 201, which is 1 pixel lower than it was the last frame. Then next time around, it's 2. Next time around, it's 3. So you're increasing circle y by 1 every frame, which lets you sort of have this effect where the ball is dropping over time because you are increasing that variable. And this is like just a fun, interesting way to play with the idea of, in this case, variables, but you can play with lots of concepts. So just another example, let's say I wanted to play with if statements. So we learned about if statements before, and we used them in a sort of like, I don't know, website driven way, which is fine because here we're learning about web development, but you can also play with if statements in this more like visual way. And so let me just throw together an example. So I'm going to create a couple more variables. So maybe I'll say like, let maybe like circle speed equals 1, and maybe that's enough. Actually, we'll see. So what I want to do is now I have my circle y and it's increasing by 1. Instead, I'm going to increase it by circle speed. So circle speed. So this line of code is increasing circle y by circle speed, which is still just 1. So hasn't really changed anything. But what I can do is add an if statement, and I can say if circle y is greater than what? If it's greater than the height, the bottom of my frame or my canvas, which is at this point 400 pixels, or I can go to the reference and is there a way for me to get the height? And sure enough, there is a variable called height that the p5 library gives me. So I'll just use that. So if I go here, so if circle y is greater than height, then I want to maybe multiply circle speed by -1. So times equals -1. And let's see if this works. I actually don't know if this will work. Let's find out. So it's going down and it's, hitting this line of code where it increases by 1. And then eventually it triggers this if statement because circle y is, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 396, 397, 398, 399, 400, and then it hits 401. And then this if statement triggers and 401 is greater than height, which is 400. And so I reverse the speed of my circle. So I basically just switch this back and forth between from 1 to -1. So I could also just say like equals -1 here, but if I have this to be like a 5, if I speed it up, this should still work. Yeah. Okay, but I like it to be slower than that, I think. And this is, another like sort of playground to play with the idea of if statements. This is the exact same concept that we were using before, but now in this sort of interactive visual environment. So I can also sort of add some logic here. So I can maybe say like if circle y is less than 0 or circle y is greater than height. So now it should bounce off both the bottom, which it should do in a second. Yep. Okay. And now it should also bounce off the top. Let's see. hopefully. And yeah, so it's switching back and forth between 1 and -1, or if I increase this, it would be like between 2 and -2 or whatever it was. So this is really powerful, and you can do lots of things with this. And I could sit here and say, oh, you could also use for loops or arrays or objects, all of the concepts that we've learned about so far. But instead, if that sounds interesting to you, I will direct you back to this page, the p5.js tutorials on happycoding.io. And there's a bunch of examples here. So if you wanted to play with like using variables, here's a way to practice that with some examples. If you wanted to practice, I don't know, here's a couple with if statements. Here's more about animation. So if you wanted to, I don't know, it's almost Halloween, so I can use my Halloween examples. So here's an example that shows a little ghost that sort of goes back and forth using some of those concepts that we talked about. And if you look at the code, you can see here's things like, here's an array that we talked about before. Here's some trigonometry if you want to get into that. But these are all concepts that we've talked about before. Calling functions, using a for loop, using an array. These are all the concepts that we talked about before, just kind of in this interactive environment. So you can play with all kinds of stuff, getting input, or here's for loops examples, or, arrays, objects, all of this stuff. You can go pretty deep down the rabbit hole, and there's lots of cool stuff that you can do. And honestly, like, I love this stuff. Like, I nerd out about this stuff a lot. And it's a way to just sort of have fun with code in a way that you're not like necessarily like making like a website for a business. You're just messing around with code, and I really love that. Okay, let's see. So the last thing that I want to mention is I've sort of alluded to this a little bit, but we haven't really left like the environment that we have been in this entire time. So we are using HTML, we are using CSS, and we are using JavaScript. The main new thing is we're using JavaScript libraries, but hopefully that idea is relatively straightforward, where you're calling code that other people have written. So, someone else wrote this background function. Someone else wrote this circle function. You don't really need to worry about like exactly how does that work behind the scenes. You can just use it and say, okay, cool, I have a background and I have a circle. But you are still in your like standard web development environment. So I haven't really changed any of this text, but I could. There's nothing stopping me from doing that. So if I go here, I can change that. So I can say like, I don't know, bouncing circle. And I can change this to whatever I want, like watch the circle bounce. And let's see, I can also do things like have, other HTML elements. So I could have, I don't know, my ULLI example in here. So like LI, I don't know, I'm not going to think too hard. Lions, tigers, bears, that's my go-to. Tigers and bears. And this is just HTML. It's just normal HTML that you've been learning this entire time, but it's now like in this web page alongside this canvas element that P5 is giving you. I can also use CSS. So let's see, if I wanted to add a style for, I don't know, my H1, I could give it, I don't know, maybe I'll color it red. And I have my red H1. I'm just using CSS, just like we have before. I can also style this canvas itself. So if I don't know, if I inspect this and I pop up my developer tools, it popped up in its own window. This is an HTML element. It got way too big. And here it is. You can see that this is what gets added to the page. It adds this canvas element, which is a normal HTML tag that lets you draw to it using JavaScript. So it looks like this has a class of P5 canvas and an ID of, okay, default canvas 0. There's probably ways to customize that, but I can also just use an element selector on my canvas. So let's try that. So if I say canvas, and I don't know, I want to give it like a border of like a thick, solid black border. And there we go. Now it has a border. And so what we're doing is we're mixing all of the things that we've learned about into a cohesive project where we're using HTML, we're using CSS, and we're using JavaScript, and we're even using JavaScript libraries to create this end result. So if I wanted to, I don't know, set the background to an image, I could do that. If I wanted to add some more like descriptive text around my sketch here, I could do that. And it's the exact same concepts that we've been learning this entire time, but in this like more like, I don't know, artistic or visual or interactive project. Okay, so that's p5.js. Now that you have learned about JavaScript libraries, you can use my favorite JavaScript library, and you can go down the rabbit hole. And I think it's a really great environment to learn about the like foundations of JavaScript. So that's one of the reasons I really like it. It's just honestly kind of fun, and I find myself just sort of playing around with it every once in a while to be like, oh, could I do that? Could I draw this like thing that I have in my brain using P5? And you know, I'm not an artist, but I think it lets you be creative, and I think that's really fun. So yeah, from here you can check out the P5 tutorials if you want to go more in that direction, or you could check out the P5 reference. In fact, I recommend checking out both and scrolling around and finding interesting looking functions and variables and seeing what they do and playing around. You can also, if you like have an idea that you want to implement in P5, hit me up and I'd love to chat through it and like point you in a direction to like, oh, maybe check out this function, or oh, maybe check out this other thing. So I'm always happy to nerd out about that stuff. All right, so I'll leave this video there. The next video will introduce a project in P5, but for now, you are now armed with the knowledge that you need to start creating your own P5 projects, which is really fun. All right, thanks for watching, and as always, of course, until next time, happy coding.